Salute, salute, salute to the ATP Combat Media Show family. It's your boy Rain. Man. Things have been moving, changing. As a good friend of mine, salute to the OG, Blue Blood Sports, hardest working man in this space. That man put out so much content, it's crazy. 3, 4, 5 times a day. Anyway, shout out to Blue. But you know, me and Blue spoke one time, and he said things change quickly in boxing, and I add to that saying how quickly things are changing. You know, and I'm new to this space of boxing, but what I've noticed is that a lot of content creators in spaces really have declared their loyalties to whether it's certain fighters, certain promotional promotional platforms, you know, fight promotion companies like PBC, Golden Boy, you know, DAZN, Matchroom, Queensberry, Gold Star, all those guys, right? And they're loyal to these spaces to the point to where they get a little overcommitted to their ideas of how of what's going to happen in boxing, how things should be happening in boxing. And when you come with different ideas, and me myself, I consider myself a pretty neutral person when it comes to this, because at the end of the day, I think as a boxing fan, you know, I'm a fan of boxing first. I'm not a fan of promotional companies. I'm not a fan of fighters first. I know some people like to go extreme with it. I'm not saying I'm not a fan of a boxer or I don't have a favorite boxer, right? Of course I do, right? But before anything, it's always going to be boxing first. It's always going to be this in the spirit of making the best fight the best. I want to see the best fights. That's where me as a boxing fan, that's why I find my entertainment is in great fights, right? And not every fight is a great fight, because it's not always the best fight. And the best, it's not always the fights you want. And granted, you can't always get the fights you want, but I think as a boxing fan, it's only natural that we're consistently applying pressure to the boxers, to the fight promoters, to give us the fights that we want, right? And I had to learn the hard way. You know what I mean? I don't know if it was I would even say it was the hard way, but to its own in its own way, it was the hard way in comparison to what a lot of people might want to interpret it as. Just saying that getting into indifference, having indifference with a certain content creator. Well, I wouldn't say even a certain content creator, but, you know, I say 1 or 2 content creators who just, you know, loyalty over their promotional companies and their fighters over everything. And me, myself, being able to be on the same page with you at one point, if I'm in agreement with you, but at the same time be able to be on the other side of a conversation if I don't agree with you. So the biggest thing that came out in the past couple of days is how Canelo Alvarez is leaving the PBC. I think it's the biggest thing shaking up the game right now. PBC, Premier Boxing Championship, was one of the, as its name says, premier boxing promotional companies out there. You know, hosting, managing, or promoting, whatever you want to call it, some of the biggest fighters in the game. And when the year started off, we all understood that PBC and Showtime were going their separate ways, and that PBC was going to be looking for another network or streaming service to showcase their boxers on. And everybody was so ecstatic and happy to see that PBC did finally make a decent deal with an Amazon Prime, huge streaming platform. You know, you guys know what Amazon Prime is. We don't need to get into what they bring to the streaming space, right? So then being able to secure that and lock that in, you know, everybody blew a little bit of relief, an air of relief, because people were nervous about what PBC was going to do with their fighters. And naturally so. I think it's only normal that people would have questions about what was going to be the next step that PBC took. Well, there were always questions and concerns, because as the beginning of the year came up, you know, we weren't hearing about the fights they're going to be planning, you know. And it was a little strange to see that their first fight that they were going to come up with was going to be at the end of the first quarter, March 30th, the card that you guys know is coming up here, with the headliners being Tim Tszyu and Keith Thurman, who are actually fighting at a catch weight as well, not even fighting at the 154 weight limit where Tim Tszyu's WBO title would be on the line, but actually a catch weight fight with a Keith Thurman that hasn't fought in about 2 years, right? And It just didn't make any sense for that to headline the card. And more importantly, I think making it a pay-per-view just really felt like PBC was reaching with this one. So questions of concern naturally are going to come up as to why and what's going on, and why wasn't the fights that was being rumored to be the fights that was going to be on the card, why weren't these fights going to be there? Why wasn't that fight in particular going to be there? But, the space, gets real, it just gets real radical, because as you're questioning these things, you have people who want to put paint jobs on you, right? They want to say that you're a hater, even I've heard things, people getting called coons and all types of nonsense that you're hearing, and you're just trying to make sense of it all. But at the same time, as a boxing fan, I think, I'm well within my right to question and ask what's going on. And if you don't got the answers, you can just say you don't have the answers. But to, paint me in a corner as somebody who's out of pocket for asking these questions, and why not asking questions about other platforms, and, I just think people have been out of pocket for a minute. So what's going on now? Canelo Alvarez himself has gone ahead and he's walking away from the PBC, and the root of the situation, or root of the problem, seems to be surrounded around allocation of funds. Guarantees that Canelo Alvarez and the PBC were in agreement on were going to be part of the arrangement in them putting together fights. And they had a 3-fight deal where it was supposed to be somewhere around $100 million, roughly about $35 million guaranteed for each fight. And it seems like the PBC got into an agreement where the fights were going to be, they knew who the fights were going to be, right? Rumor is it was supposed to be Jamal Charlo, then Errol Spence, which blew me away. I didn't even know why Errol Spence be part of that conversation, considering the fact that you guys have David Benavidez under your roster, and that why wouldn't you make David Benavidez part of that contract? That's potentially the biggest fight that could be made in boxing today. There's only 1 or 2 possible other fights that are probably better than that fight. Maybe a better Bivol, and maybe a Devin Haney Tank Davis. But, David Benavidez and Canelo Alvarez is one of the most anticipated fights. Quite frankly, maybe the biggest fight that could be made in boxing today. And if you have David Benavidez already under your roster, and you're sitting on signing Canelo Alvarez, the face of boxing, I couldn't imagine why you wouldn't secure a fight with David Benavidez. But I digress. At the end of the day, Canelo Alvarez was not able to come to an agreement. They weren't able to get back on the same page with PBC, and it looks like at this point that he should be moving on. And it looks like Matchroom, Eddie Hearn, somebody who has a good relationship with, is interested in helping them out. Now, some people would want to put the blame more on Canelo, and they want to say Canelo's been notoriously known from going from promotional company to promotional company. Look, I can't fight and push back at that. I mean, I'm aware of some of the moves he made, not all of them, right? I understood that he was a Golden Boy, and at one point he left Golden Boy because of financial disputes about how the business was being handled. Then he went over to the Zone, seemed to do good business over there. Eddie Hearn is a big fan of him and very eager to re-sign him. Eddie Hearn expanded on that to say the reason he left was because he wasn't able to get him the fights he needed to get. A lot of fights weren't in his power or in his reach to get because they weren't under his promotional banner. So Eddie Hearn has shown a history of being willing to work with fighters. He's doing it right now with Devin Haney. Devin Haney had signed the Matchroom, but in order for Devin Haney to make the fight with Ryan Garcia, he had to do the fight deal underneath Golden Boy. So Eddie Hearn had no problem letting him go and make that money and make that fight happen. He did the same thing with Lomachenko, right? Not Lomachenko, excuse me, Kambosos and Lomachenko, to be honest with you, right? They're both on the top rank, and Devin Haney went over there temporarily to go become an undisputed champion, also to defend his title under the top rank, just for him to come back to Matchroom. So Eddie Hearn has a history of doing these things. So in turn, it looks like Canelo Alvarez may be entertaining coming back to work with Eddie Hearn. I can tell you just from what I've seen Eddie Hearn saying, he's way more than interested to do business with Canelo Alvarez. For him, he was in a profitable business with Canelo Alvarez. But, he moved ahead, and now he's with PBC, and PBC and him weren't able to come to on the same page for an agreement. A lot of people want to kind of like put it on Canelo, basically saying that Canelo's notoriously being too expensive and not being profitable for companies to work with. That might be true, right? But ultimately, PBC as a company were aware of what they were dealing with when they signed Canelo. They had to be aware of what was to be expected when working with Canelo, and clearly the way they planned out how they were going to work with Canelo, they were ill prepared in dealing with the machine of Canelo Alvarez, the resources that need to be allocated, and the push, the marketing that needs to be put there, and clearly the guaranteed paydays that Canelo Alvarez requires in order to be signed with a promotional company. So Canelo Alvarez leaving now puts some perspective on, and it adds more questions as to what is going on with the PBC. How is this deal structured with Amazon? Does Amazon provide any type of reassurance to the PBC, or are they helping in any kind of way to lock in guarantees for these fighters? Or is it just a promotional deal, streaming service platform, marketing on the streaming service deal where, Amazon has protected themselves from things that they may have heard of in the past, what PBC did with other networks that they got with that supposedly didn't walk away, leaving those networks very profitable. PBC's always been known for taking care of their fighters. I don't know if I would say that they've been known for taking care of the networks that they've been on. They've always held the leverage to have certain fighters underneath their promotional banner that were the biggest fighters in the game, and a lot of networks are interested in being involved in doing business with the biggest fighters in the game. But it seems like the way the deals were structured in between PBC and these big networks, it didn't leave these networks, profitable. Their ROI, return on investment, for paying for all these fights didn't seem to pan out enough at the end for them to want to continue to do business with the PBC. They let them go. So now Canelo Alvarez in the air, supposedly maybe heading in the direction of an Eddie Hearn, but we don't know where he's going. And to be honest with you, we don't even know that he's left the PBC, right? We're just hearing what's going on. But I can't lie to you. At this point, I think it's well over 80% likely that he is leaving the PBC at this point. But we'll see what ends up happening. But so what fights are next for Canelo at this point? A lot of people are leaning towards, obviously, I think an obvious option is Edgar Berlanga over at Matchroom. Why? Because if Canelo goes to work with Eddie Hearn, naturally you would think Eddie Hearn would put his fighter on the table to be able to make that money before he'd go outside of his network to make that fight happen. But once again, Eddie Hearn just being honest and saying, listen, this is not the only option. If Canelo wants to fight, let's say, David Benavidez, he says he's there to facilitate that. Be in contact with David Benavidez's team and try to coordinate a fight between that. Whatever the biggest fight is that Canelo Alvarez wants to get, Eddie Hearn is willing to make whatever sacrifices or any sort of concessions that need to be made in the spirit of making a bigger fight. You got to respect that from the DAZN or a Matchroom president, that he's willing to do that. I honestly feel like a lot of fight promotional companies like PBC, Top Rank, Golden Boy, all those guys, that they have a likely mindset, a very common parallel mindset to that mindset, to be willing to sacrifice or concede or do whatever they need to do to cross promote, ultimately not get all the profit but get a fair share of what's on the table, in the spirit of making the best fight the best, because that's what's important. American boxing is losing its steam more than ever. A lot of people feel like it's lost completely because fighters are getting overpaid, in some people's opinion, and overpaid in the fact that paying them so much makes it difficult to make future fights with them. When you're paying them, 30, 20, 15, 20, 25 million to fight fights that aren't even the best fighting the best fights, isn't the biggest fights that are on demand from the space, you spoil them. And when it comes time to make those bigger fights, they're going to want more money, clearly, for that. And if you're not going to pay them more money, unfortunately, who ends up losing? The fan base, right? The fan base doesn't get the fights. And ultimately, these fighters start to become inactive. They're not their prime selves anymore. We're not watching the best version of themselves competing against the best version of somebody else because they're sitting outside the ring too long, right? I mean, we can get deeper and deeper into it, but at the end of the day, the most important thing is fans. Be a fan of the sport before you're a fan of the fighter. It may sound cliche, it might sound like we're beating a dead horse, but there's a reason behind it. And belts do matter. The idea that you guys don't want to value belts anymore, that you want to make it to where it has nothing to do with the conversation, is you don't understand the Pandora box that you're opening up. that you've opened at this point, and why we're sitting here and you got over 250, 200 plus, whatever number of fighters underneath a promotional banner who you guys as fans, who myself as a fan, we're not getting to see them compete. At this point, we don't even get to see them see them compete against tomato cans. No less to see them compete against the fighters we want to see them compete against. So we have to understand that there's a cost for everything. The price of some things are a little too high. You know, the price of paying a fighter the most money in the world to fight in the easiest fight he ever did is that you got to pay him even more money to see him fight a fight that you want to see him do, right? And nobody's hating or speaking on the pockets of a fighter, but understanding and looking at the PBC structure and how it's been made and seeing it be at its highest point and seem to be one of the biggest and influential promotional companies on the space. But as you're watching them right now, it seems like from the outside looking in, it seems like you're seeing them kind of fall apart a little bit, that they're having a hard time holding themselves up, because it turns out that Showtime was a big reason as to why they were able to pay these guaranteed purses and pay these fighters the biggest bags they ever received. And now that they don't have a Showtime structured deal in place anymore with an Amazon, and it doesn't seem like they're able to, I don't see them really looking at, from Steven Espinosa's point of view, I guess they're working out a lot of different deals with a lot of different a lot of different networks, like the CBS's, the Fox Sports, maybe ESPN's, but networks on that level, on that caliber of network to help them facilitate some time and space to put some of these fights together on. It just seems like it's a little bit of an uphill battle for the promotional company right now. But at the end of the day, wanting them to succeed, because if they succeed, then we get to see fights. So there's no vested interest in seeing the PBC fall apart. But there is vested interest in seeing the fights we want to see. And you can say what you want, come high, low, hot or cold, however you feel about it. The Zone has been consistently giving us product and not charging us pay-per-views. They have a pay-per-view that they charge us for, and they will charge us a pay-per-view. But at the end of the day, unless you're counting what you pay for the app, that's okay as well. But they're giving us 2 fights a month. They're staying pretty consistent. Top Rank has been pretty consistent too. They haven't been as, yes, people are going to say they're doing Thursday nights now instead of Saturday nights. That's all politics, and that's all structured around the fact that ESPN has other things that they're showcasing. And, from what I understand, the last couple of fights were due to like Formula One racing, car racing. They have other events, and they don't want to be putting on events. ESPN's, I'm sure, is going to try their best to not put on events at the same time, to have, their own events competing against each other. You know what I mean? They want to give themselves the best opportunity to get views. So yeah, there's some fights that are happening on Thursday night, but ultimately they're not charging for the fights. And more importantly, from a boxing fan's point of view, they're quality fights. Keyshawn Davis against Pedraza was a good fight. Teofimo versus Jimmer Ortiz, some people didn't like it, but at the end of the day, it was a big fight. The prospects over there are giving great undercards. The Abdullah Masons, Emiliano Vargases, you look at Andy Cruz, they got some real good prospect talent coming up, and they got some decent headliners on there, and they don't charge you a pay-per-view unless it's a worthwhile pay-per-view. It's a chance. Teofimo, that wasn't even a pay-per-view. I don't even know why I would say that, right? But when you look at the Zone right now, getting ready to do the Francis Ngannou and Anthony Joshua, and they're also locked in to do the Better Biev and the Bivol. And these fights are fights that are already done, contract signed, dates already in the bag, working on the undercard. They're actively moving forward in a time where, like I've, I had a content creator who I have a lot of respect for mention, everybody's suffering. Everybody's slowing down. Everybody's having to revisit their business model structures. But however they're doing it, these other companies haven't stopped giving us fights, right? PBC has. They're not giving us the fights. There's a lot of stories going on in the background. You see fighters like Sabril Matias and Ray Vargas leaving, and now Canelo Alvarez leaving. Terrence Crawford supposedly leaving, staying a free agent. And I'm sure as the time goes by, we can hear a lot more that's probably going to happen. Now, a pro to the whole entire Canelo Alvarez leaving the PBC thing at this point may be that it opens up the budget a little bit, right? Opens up a space, clearly. They can open up one of those 12 out of 14 slots that they had for the pay-per-views that they made the deal with Amazon Prime on. So now that opens that up, as well as, freeing up probably, 10s, 20s, 30s, 40 millions of dollars, you know, having to put it behind Canelo Alvarez, not having to do that anymore, gives them the ability to facilitate some fights, you know what I mean, that maybe they were having questions on how to do before. Maybe that opens up some opportunities for them. But regardless, keeping the eye close on the situation and understanding that aesthetically from the outside looking in, it does look a little, it can throw you a little bit when you're trying to make sense of why certain fights aren't happening, right? And why are fighters asking for their guaranteed money? There's even rumors out there that Gervonta Tank Davis was asking for his guaranteed money, and that the PBC wasn't able to give him a clear-cut answer on how they were going to handle that, to the point to where it's stalling him out from even committing to doing a fight. But we'll see what happens. You know, we're looking forward to hopefully a Tank Davis and a Frank Martin fight, and we're looking forward to see, you know, over 100 plus, 200 plus fighters also get their fights coordinated and put on there, so we, the fan, can see greatness happening in the ring. But you guys let me know what you think. You know, at what point is it okay to ask a question? What's going on with the PBC? Question their structured deal with Amazon Prime. Why aren't we getting the fights we want to get? This is about getting the fights, right? It's not about counting their pockets. But it doesn't seem like they're able to give the fighters what they want in their pockets, give us the fights that the fight fans want to get. So it's your boy Rain. Listen, remember to subscribe, like, hate, whatever you do, comment. Give me a couple thumbs up. You know, remember to hit the thumbs up, hit your bell icon so you're getting alerts when all this content drops. But on that note, it's your boy Rain. It's ATP Combat Media Show. We out.